lands of the Anishinaabe Nation. This spot where we gather is the traditional land of the Three Fires Confederacy, the Ottawa, Potawatomi, and Ojibwe. We also recognize that this land is now home to the Delaware Nation. This land was settled through the McKee Purchase Treaty of 1790, and we, as beneficiaries of the treaty, must recognize our responsibilities, including our collective responsibilities to the land and water. Mr. Mayor, tonight there is no supplementary agenda. Rules of Council Chambers. The municipality of Chatham-Kent supports open meetings that welcome debate of public policy issues in an atmosphere of inclusiveness, integrity, civility, fairness, and respect for differing points of view. Anyone conducting themselves in a way that disturbs, disrupts, or impedes the orderly conduct of the meeting, interrupts or makes derogatory statements or hate speech or defamatory comments about councillors, staff, speakers, or fellow members of the public may result in removal from the premises. This also applies to deputations. We ask that you do not approach members of council if they are seated in their council seats. The public, unless invited, is not permitted to come into the gated horseshoe area, and the use of posters, signage, and literature is also prohibited. Tonight we've received regrets from Councillor Anderson and Councillor Story. We have received no disclosures of pecuniary interest for the open session agenda items. Moving on to item 11, recognitions. 11A is the artist feature for Ian Kennedy, and I'll turn it over to Councillor Sakachi to make the introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Ian Kennedy, a resident of Erie Beach, Ontario, is an educator and journalist with a passion for storytelling. The founder of the Chatham-Kent Sports Network, Ian is a contributor for the Hockey News and Yahoo Sports. His stories have also appeared in Outdoor Canada, the Globe and Mail, Chatham Voice, and Canadian Horse Journal. Ian's debut novel, On Account of Darkness, Shining Light on Race and Sport, will be published in May by British Columbia's Tidewater Press. Ian lives on Lake Erie with his wife, daughter, their dog, and cat. Together they love to travel and are fifth-generation beekeepers.
Ian, if you're present, you can come forward.
There we go. Thanks for inviting me. I'm actually reading from my second book today, which is called Ice in Their Veins, Women's Relentless Pursuit of the Puck. I wrote it actually after discovering some Chatham-Kent history that I really didn't know, which was about a woman named Marion Coveney, who's a Wallaceburg area person who was the first ever captain of a Canadian women's national hockey team. Something that, as a longtime sports journalist and lover myself and a Wallaceburg product, I had never heard of her. And I thought that that was quite embarrassing, that the first ever Team Canada captain was from Wallaceburg, and I had no idea who she was. So I tried to rectify that by researching and writing for this book while editing for the Hockey News women's coverage. So I actually wanted to read something just quickly. I start each chapter in the book with kind of a personal recollection, and since my little daughter, who's back there, Ezra, is there, I thought I'd read something that references her in the book. She's actually got a broken leg back there from an ice skating incident, so it's kind of fitting for all of it, but I'll read to you a little bit from one of the chapters here. Sitting on my couch at home, my daughter sits beside me. She's 5 and filled with dreams of a world that can be. Her mom has raised her to be strong, to lift her chin in defiance of anyone who tries to define what she can and cannot be. I hope I've helped that as well. When we watch hockey, she picks a color, not a team to cheer for. Are you going for the red or white team, Daddy? I like both teams, but I think I'm cheering for the red in this game. How about you? Red, she replies. I'm cheering for red too. As the game progresses, she'll stand and stare at the television, cheering on her chosen team and announcing the score. Sometimes she'll grab a hairbrush and, pretending it's a microphone, say, "Live from the arena for the Hockey News," in the best broadcaster voice she has. I see her point at the screen saying, "I like her," when a close-up comes on, and at least once each game she'll ask, "Daddy, are these girls?" as if to make sure it's true. When I answer, watching her face mesmerized by the action, I see the players dashing across the sclera and iris of her eyes before the black puck vanishes into her pupil, traversing nerve pathways where a memory is formed. A memory that tells her that girls and women play hockey. They play professional hockey, and she can too. I just wanted to start with that because I thought it was really important to look at the future of where we are right now. And in the book, you'll find a ton of Chatham-Kent stories from the Lipstick Tournament in Wallaceburg, which was paramount into launching women's hockey globally, really, if you look at the history of it. Founded by a woman named Grace Small, who doesn't get any accolades either. But Marion Coveney was, the dedication in this book is to her. And I really hope that council can continue to find ways to support women and girls in sports and hockey in Chatham-Kent, and to open pathways for all people, whether that's anyone that's in the LGBTQ plus community or women and girls in sport that are often excluded. But I really wanted to thank you for inviting me, and hopefully you can find some Chatham-Kent history in this book or in my first book, On Account of Darkness, that looks at the Chatham Colored All-Stars and a lot of athletes in the area that have been unrecognized as well. So thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Ian. We appreciate you coming in. This is part of our series that we celebrate a lot of amazing people in arts and culture in Chatham-Kent. We have a lot of them, and it's great that we're able to, during a lot of council meetings, celebrate those individuals that maybe all of us don't know, but we do now. So thank you for that.
Item 11B is recognition of the Bothwell Fire Response, and I'd invite Chief Case forward at this time to make the introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In the early hours of the 17th of January, a member of the public in Bothwell noticed a large fire developing in the downtown core. That member of the public dialed 911, and within 6 minutes, Station 9 Bothwell were on scene, quickly followed by Station 8 Thamesville, to find a rapidly developing fire in the downtown core, which had already spread to 2 other buildings. Seeking help from other stations, Station 11 Ridgetown and Station 10 Highgate attended, as well as a command unit from Chatham, and the incident was commanded by Assistant Chief Walters. We're here today to recognise their dedication to the local community, to recognise their actions in the most brutal of weather and arduous conditions, and the fact that without doubt, these firefighters that night saved the fire from spreading to other buildings and saved the downtown core. It's with great pride, Mr. Mayor, I present to you the firefighters of Station 8, 9, 10, and on behalf of Station 11, Chief Walters will accept their commendation, sir.
We'll go on to item 12, presentations.
Item 12A is a presentation from the Chatham-Kent Chamber of Commerce. With us tonight from the Chamber is BJ Griffiths and Roy Ring. At this time, I would invite you forward.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff and councillors. Thank you for committing your time to the well-being of our community. Thank you to the municipal staff across Chatham-Kent for supporting our vision. I do wish to highlight a special gratitude to our first responders, our supporting service providers, volunteers, and community organizations that keep our businesses safe. These have been challenging times, and on behalf of the Chamber membership, we'd like to thank you. Just a brief introduction for myself. So BJ Griffiths, I'm the current chair of the Chamber, Chatham-Kent Chamber of Commerce for about the next 20 days or so until our AGM at the end of March.
Greetings, Your Worship and Council, Rory Ring, and I'm glad to be back to my stomping grounds in Southern Ontario after 8.5 years in Sault Ste. Marie, which, by the way, has about 20 feet of snow.
We'd also just like to briefly introduce our team. So Sarah Molnar is our chair-elect, so Sarah will be taking over the chair at the end of March. Amanda Clark, so Sarah's part of Paragon Property Management. Amanda Clark is the Boys and Girls Club of Chatham-Kent. Our treasurer, Aaron Ryan, is with the Chatham-Kent House Alliance, and our past chair is Ryan Organ with Enbridge. Some directors, Sarah Apers is with Farm Credit. Debesh Rejma is with Everest Convention Center. Adrian Van Dyke with Agris Cooperative. Michael Verhoeven with RBC Dominion Securities. Todd Bennett with Chatham Honda. John Quaglio Law Office. And Scott Curry with the CK Barnstormers. I think it's important to introduce our directors to show the diversity of industry that we have within our chamber and how we advocate for all the different sectors throughout Chatham-Kent. And just a little bit about our purpose and goal. So really our goal here today is to just kind of let you know what we do and as well as reach some of those goals together. A stronger partnership with the Chamber of Commerce as well as Council, economic development, all of those different areas is really going to make our community stronger. And I'll pass it over to Rory.
Thanks, BJ. One of the things that really helps someone like myself who's coming back to a community and connect to that community is to look at the strategic plan for the municipality. And it really does resonate of how closely aligned we are to these four strategic objectives for the municipality of Chatham-Kent. When we talk about economic prosperity, our members are made up of the innovators, creative thinkers, the entrepreneurs. They come from the sectors, manufacturing, industrial production, agro-industry, technology, finance, food service, construction. And about 10% of our membership is made up from the not-for-profit organizations as well. So you can see we fully engage with all aspects of economic prosperity. When we talk about health and safety in our community, we are part of a social action group of about 20 chambers across Ontario, really trying to connect as best we can the relationship between business and the social issues that many of those communities face. I mean, many communities across the province know what has happened to downtown since the onset of the pandemic and the changes that have occurred in our communities with homelessness. We really want to bring attention to that because we can advocate for our community through the private sector to government to help solve these issues. People and culture. We know the cultural industry is a real economic driver. It is one of those things that attracts a younger generation who are really looking for a lifestyle of community to come and live in, and that is our workforce of the future. Environmental sustainability. It really matters to chambers and our businesses because of the impact on risk management and their financial performance. Sustainable practices reduce operational risks, lower the cost of capital, and potentially decrease insurance premiums. So those companies that onboard sustainable practices are really able to mitigate those risks, which brings a stronger sense of economic prosperity to your community. And just a comment on the guiding principles. In the times that we are in, the one that really stands out is resilience. And I'm going to score some points with my boss here and take a quote from one of the press releases that we issued. While the challenges are undoubtedly present, Chatham-Kent's economic fundamentals remain strong. Our diverse economy, skilled workforce, strategic resources position us well to navigate the new trade landscape. By focusing on innovation, strengthening our competitiveness, and articulating our shared values around the world, we are turning potential challenges into opportunities for growth and collaboration. And thank you to BJ for that insight. We were founded in 1872, so we've been at this game a long time. And over those 150 years, and what is interesting is the evolution when it was founded in 1807, over those years, the focus changing strictly from commerce and economy to the concepts of embracing civic and social welfare. And that's why you see when we talk about the things that align us as a community, things that align us as a municipality, are really embraced by the Chamber of Commerce. The powers of collaboration. This is just a list of the things that we do on a regular basis, not only here in Chatham-Kent, but throughout the region. We've brought together the Chambers of Commerce from Sarnia, Wallaceburg, Leamington, Windsor, and Amherstburg together as a united group. These are staff chambers to have a very regional approach and the strength of that. And that's very critical at a time like this when we are facing the trade challenges that we are. But none of these elements can be achieved by yourself. And what is the result of that? The result of that is shared benefit. And just a little story, up in Sault Ste. Marie, we used to be considered a construction contractor, so we would have to be dedicated to one particular labor group. That has been around for about 15 years. There's only 2 communities in all of Ontario that had that. And as an advocate working together with that municipality, we were able to have that construction employer designation erased. When I was in Sarnia, Lambton, we combined our efforts with the municipality, economic development, and Lambton College to go down to Queen's Park and advocate for the college to secure $12 million in funding for their health sciences project. Now that's a few years ago, but the elements still work, that when we do that together, we can share these benefits together. And at the end of the day, there is some benefit, just for the Chamber of Commerce through the ability to influence on generating policy that is business friendly, which drives shared economic prosperity. It helps our members gain visibility. And in today's world, visibility is viability. And when you're a small business, that is absolutely critical. And we help those businesses get access to the resources that are provided by the municipality. So some of the places that we have connected is with the Economic Development, Small Business Center, the Immigration Partnership, CK Jobs, Arts and Culture, Office of the CAO, and Corporate Finance. And we continue to build those relationships so that we understand what path you're on and how we can help support that journey. Oops, wrong button. So what we would like to do is just talk to you, and BJ is going to take over here, about what some of those possible next steps might be for us to journey this path together.
So what is possible for next steps? So establishing regular joint meetings between the Chamber and the municipality leaders to foster an open communication and alignment of our goals. We're currently in the middle of our strategic plan for the next 5 years, so I think that could be an extremely important next step. Create joint task force to address specific local challenges, combining expertise from both organizations. Understand and align with with constituents' priorities, vision, and aspirations. Offer Chamber expertise and resources to assist in the tackling challenges, such as providing data and research for relevant issues, and act as a conduit between business, your community, and the municipality, conveying concerns, needs, and suggestions from the business community. Our first step, you'll receive an email from our President and CEO, Rory Ring, asking for your input into our strategic plan. We do ask that each one of you respond with a short inquiry and or your opinion. And then we'll just say thank you. So I did want to say one thing. So Mayor Caniff, in the last couple of years at the Mayor's Breakfast, he said something that I always talk about, and it's partnerships, and how partnerships are going to be the only way that we continue to grow and prosper in our community. And we will only be successful if we can collaborate and celebrate together. And I hear a buzzer going off, so it sounds like we're done. And any questions?
Have any questions? Councillor Harrigan.
Thanks so much, BJ and Rory, for that presentation. That's really helpful to see kind of the history piece too, and where there's opportunity for the chamber to grow. A question that I have for you, you represent the CK Chamber of Commerce, but in smaller communities there are also local, oftentimes volunteer-driven chamber groups and events. Are you connected with some of those chambers, and is there an opportunity to create a bit of a network of Chamber of Commerces in Chatham-Kent, if not?
So we work with some of those chambers. So I've been in talks with Blenheim. Blenheim's not an active Chamber of Commerce, and speaking with the folks there and looking at kind of dissolving that and it becoming part of that CK or Chatham-Kent Chamber. What, if you remember the AGM last year, which I'm sure a lot of folks don't, that was a bit of my goal, is to have one chamber in Chatham-Kent. So, because what we're doing, what we're advocating, what we're taking to the province, municipality, and to the chamber, it's for Chatham-Kent. It's not just for Chatham. And Rory's been doing a great job working together with Wallaceburg, with the Wallaceburg Chamber, in helping and driving those and having some joint commitments. And I can let him speak to that if he wants.
Yeah, no, the chamber is a great network. So our CEOs, you know, whether they're general managers, executive directors, always really try to support each other as much. So we have the staff chamber at Wallaceburg, and then there is I think a registered chamber in Ridgetown, but it's not being active. Blenheim is as BJ referred to. Tilbury I've reached out to. But one of the things that we can do in those volunteer-based chambers is lend the support and the capacity that we have to really help those chambers grow those local businesses. So we really want to stay connected to them. If they would like to rely on us solely as that resource, we absolutely would enter into those conversations. We also want to support those BIAs that exist in our communities, because they are very important centers for gathering those business communities in those designated areas. So we can help leverage them. But also one of the things that most of these smaller chambers don't do is the advocacy work, right? The ability to generate the written documentation or be connected to the Ontario Chamber of Commerce and the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, of which we are all part of. I sit actually on the OCC Board of Directors. And it's that connectivity that helps amplify the voice of your local business. And I mean, if you can imagine, we've all seen the person with a placard sitting on the street corner yelling for whatever, you know, advocacy they want. That's one person, but if you put 1,000 people behind that, it's powerful, and it can move mountains. So that's kind of the position that or the strategy that we're looking to unfold in this community. So
Great, thank you so much.
Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Mayor Cannon. Ridgetown, their chambers is active. I'm on it. And,
excellent.
They still do quite a bit of work around town.
Excellent. Then we need to get connected.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Appreciate the presentation.
The next item is 12B, a presentation from the Lower Thames Valley Conservation Authority regarding the Thames River Ice Jam Flooding Emergency Preparedness. And Jason Wintermute is here on behalf of the Conservation Authority to provide a presentation.
Good evening. As mentioned, my name is Jason Wintermute. I'm with the Lower Thames Valley Conservation Authority. And tonight I'm here to provide some information about the risk this year of flooding and ice jams on the Thames River. So why am I here discussing this tonight? Well, we had a major free flow event of the Thames River in 2018, followed by an ice jam in 2019. And This year is actually the first year since 2019 where we've had over 20 centimeters of ice on the Thames River. This is combined with above average water stored in the snowpack in the upper Thames River watershed. And so that means that this year there's a greater risk than we've seen in the last few for flooding on the Thames River. So there's a variety of sources of flooding in Chatham-Kent. For example, the shoreline flooding that we saw over the last few years. We can have just heavy rains that overwhelm our sewer systems. You can have flooding on McGregor Creek, which we haven't seen in many years, but used to flood large areas of South Chatham. And then, of course, there's flooding on the Sydenham River from my neighboring conservation authority to the north, the St. Clair region. But today I'm talking primarily about the ones on the Thames River, and there's two types. I'm going to be talking about flooding on the Thames just from excessive water in the river. And that type of flooding, usually we have a little bit more lead time to prepare. Usually it's 2 or 3 days of lead time to prepare. But when it comes to an ice jam, they roll out very, very quickly. And it tends to affect, obviously, communities downstream more so than upstream. I'll talk about these throughout here. So the first type of flooding, referred to as free flow, is just excess water in the river. And it can happen at any time. It's really just weather dependent. But it most likely happens in the spring, where there's a significant amount of water stored in the snowpack in the upper Thames watershed. And then we get a warm spell and rain, and that melts the snowpack, which produces extra water that combines with the rain and comes down and produces high flows on the river. So in 2025, like this year, we don't really know what the temperatures are going to get to, and we don't really know how much rain we're going to get. That's weather and can change quite quickly. But we do know that as of March 1st, snow surveys were done in the upper Thames watershed, and there's 73% more water stored in their snowpack than there is in an average year. And that's about 90 millimeters of water, or of rainfall, you'd say, stored in their snowpack, a significant amount. So I've got some pictures of kind of like the worst flooding that occurred. This was Thamesville of 1947. Kind of the first community in Chatham-Kent upstream that gets impacted by flooding. And the most recent one that impacted Thamesville, which was 2018. The next community downstream that tends to get impacted is Chatham here itself. This is Thames Street out front of the 5th Street Bridge in 37. And this is what it looked like in 2018, again along on the river here. We do have a pretty good sense of what will flood in the city here. And so this is some maps that were produced in 2018 where we knew what the river level was going to get to, and we produced some maps to show like what was going to get flooded. So we have a pretty good handle on what happens with these free flow events. Moving on to ice jams, though, they're a bit more harder to predict. They can cause flooding with much lower flows in the river, and they primarily affect the communities kind of from prairie siding downstream. But if an ice jam happens, it can actually back up water all the way into the city of Chatham here. And if that happens, we have to operate some of our flood control structures. And if it happens to overtop the dikes that are downstream of Chatham or break them, historically it's flooded huge areas in Dover, Raleigh, Tilbury East, and Tilbury North. To get an ice jam, though, there's some ingredients we need. And first, you need enough ice on the river. And kind of the opposite of that is you can't have too many warm days that melts out the ice on the river. It needs to be pretty solid ice to create a jam. And then you need enough flows on the river to cause the ice to lift up, break into chunks, and then start moving downstream where it kind of jumbles up on itself and then jams. And it can get caught up either at like a bend in the river, or when it tries to push out into Lake St. Clair, there can be issues there too. And for people who haven't seen what an ice jam looks like, this is what it looked like at 2019 at Prairie Siding, where just the entire width of the river is just filled with rubble of ice the whole way across. So what are the current conditions? Well, on February 25th, the Lower Thames measured 23 centimeters of ice on the river. And that was just before we had a little warm up from the 24th to the 28th that basically makes it more dangerous to go out on the ice and kind of get this information. That's just slightly more than what we had during the 2019 ice jam. We had 20 centimeters for the 2019 ice jam, so we're slightly above that. But again, this is weather dependent, so we don't know how many days of warming we may get before there's enough flows on the river that causes the ice to lift and break. And so we don't know how many warming days before that might degrade the ice, and we don't know how high the flow is going to get. So we're watching the situation there. But what we can say is that with that amount of excess water, that 73% more stored in the upper Thames, we're much more likely to be able to get those high flows that'll cause issues if it breaks up like that. So it can jam anywhere there's a bend, but if it actually makes it to the lake, then there's a second question about how it can push out into the lake. And so Lake St. Clair currently remains frozen at the mouth. And there's another little twist this year that's been interesting, and that's that there were some blockages on the St. Clair River that's caused Lake St. Clair to drop about 30 centimeters in February due to these restrictions. And what that means is that there isn't as much depth of water under the ice sheet for the ice to push out into the lake. And here's a quick graph of where the dark blue line at the bottom is the current lake levels, and you can see it. The black dashed line is average water level for the lake, and so it dropped from above average way down, and it's kind of on its way back up now. So, so this presents a slightly greater risk again of if the ice jam made it to the mouth, it might have more problems getting out. Don't really know how it plays out until we see it, but. So in terms of what's happened, this is a list of ice jams that have occurred in my lifetime, from the worst being in 1985, which flooded about 14,000 acres, all the way to 2019 that affected kind of the Bradley and Jeanette's Creek area with about 1,700 acres. And some figures, maps, I guess, showing the extents where the light gray here on this figure is kind of a composite of all the ice jams that have ever occurred, and where the dark area was what happened in that particular year. So 79 flooded a lot north of the river. 85, which was our largest, flooded both north and south of the river. And this is what ended up flooding in 2019, our more recent one. So still a substantial area, but not as many people as some of the other jams. In terms of what it looks like out there, as you saw in that figure, it was several concessions wide, so you get kind of this low-level flooding over huge areas. Again, this is kind of like the worst floods, 85 kind of floods. But then there's other issues that happen with that. So, for example, in 1985, when the dikes breached, this is a picture of the River Road. They estimated 170 cubic meters per second was flowing over each of the roads north and south of the river. Again, 85 was the worst flood that we had seen there. And as I mentioned, it can back up into the city of Chatham. So I picked the worst one so they're obvious. This is out Lower Thames office across the river from Tecumseh Park. So it backs up all the way into the city. And then more recently, this is 2019 jam, where it backed up into Chatham and affected Siskin Court. So it can happen. So kind of to summarize, there's no guarantee that we will or won't get a flood or an ice jam this year. As I said, it's quite weather dependent. However, all the ingredients are there that one could happen this year, and we need to be prepared because historically there have been some very large damaging floods. And I say be prepared. We are being prepared. The current risks are being monitored. I've presented some of the information here. And Lower Thames and Chatham-Kent staff have already had a meeting this year to discuss the risks and prepare, which is one of the reasons why I'm here before council. And I would like to add that, I feel that the Chatham-Kent staff here are actually quite experienced in these kind of things. Between the 2018, the 2019 flood, and all the lakeshore flooding that we've seen, 2019, 2020, there's actually quite a bit of experience amongst the staff on how to deal with floods and flooding emergencies. But there are always new and changing factors that we need to be aware of and pay attention to. And so, so here we are providing this information. So, Mr. Mayor, that concludes my presentation. If there's any questions.
Any questions of Jason? Councillor Harrigan.
Thanks, Jason, for that presentation. I have a technical question for you, and then I might have a follow-up question through the mayor to Edward about our preparedness. So you had mentioned in the ice jam that there can be two risks for flood. One is like the ice kind of raises the water levels up and then it's flooding over the berms or the dikes. But then the other is that there's a potential for that pressure to kind of penetrate the like existing flood infrastructure that we have in place. Did I catch that correctly?
Yes, that's correct.
So just in follow-up, and I remember the 2019, we called it the backyard flood in Jeanette's Creek because it seemed like all of the neighbors were impacted, but there was significant money that we invested in remediation of the berm along the Thames River following that work. So I'm just wondering if that work potentially helps us to be better prepared to mitigate against potential floods because of a future ice jam. Like maybe we still have the ice jam, but are we better protected than we were 6 years ago?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor. The short answer is yes. We've been monitoring since that time, but also through the DMAP funding, we have been improving areas along the Thames River as the years have gone by. The purpose of today's presentation really was to raise awareness. And what you don't see in behind the scenes is the amount of coordination work that's being done between the Lower Thames, I'll also say with the St. Clair Conservation Authority, and our staff here in IES and fire and other departments to prepare for something like this. But we are always monitoring, looking at the conditions, and a lot of the work that we have done over the past 5 years has been to help either alleviate or deal or mitigate some of the issues there.
Great, thank you. And just a quick follow-up, you may not have an answer for this, but is there anything that homeowners or residents who are currently living in the flood-prone areas can do to potentially prepare or maybe be better prepared in the event that we see flooding this year?
Absolutely, through you, Mr. Mayor. There's lots of things, and it kind of depends on where they are and what their risks are. So areas upstream that aren't protected behind the dikes, where there's kind of free flowing and the river can like come in and out. Especially for people who back onto the river, we need to clear up our yards to make sure that stuff doesn't get in, the debris and stuff like that. A lot of the issues with flooding actually ends up being with debris and things like that. Debris will block culverts and provide issues with drainage, even for, rainstorm type stuff. If your catch basins are blocked, this causes problems. So one of the big things actually is just cleaning up your yards to make sure that they're free of debris. If there is flooding, nothing can happen. Of course, we often hear about, 48-hour emergency preparedness kits or 72-hour emergency preparedness kits. Those are good ideas as well. In other areas like behind the dikes where there isn't necessarily the river going to be flowing, there's less obvious things, but of course, emergency preparedness kits and things like that are always important as well. Those who are in the flood-prone areas should be paying attention to the communications put out by the Conservation Authority and the municipality. There are always messages put out when floods are unfolding about what areas are there. My messages often specifically speak of certain roads in the city here itself that are expected to get flooded and things like that. So paying attention to the communications is something else that is very important for homeowners.
Great, thank you very much.
Councillor McGrail.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. My question is, I'm a Mitchells Bay resident, and is this low water a saving grace for us, or could it be a hinder to us? Because right now, the water is pretty low here. Is that going to help us, or is there something I'm not seeing and this could be a hinder to us?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, these kind of things are kind of double-edged swords, right? So if the water is lower, that, take a step back here. So Chatham-Kent is very kind of low-lying, right? If you see the flood-prone areas, like maps of flood-prone areas, there are massive areas around the lake and around the mouth of the Thames River and Mitchell's Bay as well. So the lower the water is, there's less water kind of backed up all of our drainage networks, and that allows the water to escape faster. So lower water levels kind of help the stuff flow out faster. On the other hand, as I mentioned about the ice sheet, when the ice is trying to escape out into the lake, if it's not as deep, then it's harder for it to push out because it doesn't have as much water to kind of float through. So many of these kind of things are kind of double-edged swords, which there's pros and cons depending on what your kind of issue is in terms of the flooding. So.
Thank you for that. At this point, I'd like to call up Eric to talk about CK Alert. It's it really ties in with what you're just saying here, so I think it's a great opportunity to start letting people know what services available out there.
Mr. Mayor, can I jump in whilst Eric's getting ready?
Certainly.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's worth noticing behind us we've got the fire chiefs and we also have Holly Rober, who's here from the Provincial Emergency Operations Centre, to give some indication of the amount of planning that's taken place. I'll give credit to Eric. Our CK Alert service was due to go live in about a month or two's time, and we brought this forward based upon the potential risk here. So what Eric is going to tell us is very up to date and timely, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
Councillor Scotchy?
Thank you. Sorry, just before you get into that, I did have one question. Councillor Harrigan asked my initial question, but I guess the only question I had was kind of affiliation between our general manager of Health and Human Services as well as yourself. We all are very aware that we have a very at-risk encampment by an area that when we do get flooded, does flood significantly. Some of these individuals might have a little bit more of a challenging time getting notification from I guess an electronic method. So I guess if this were to flood, we always see flood warnings and all that, but how often, how long do we have between the fact of a flood warning or, the LTVCA communicating with our staff that we're actually going to have a flood? And then I just kind of wanted to ensure that our team, I'm very, I know that we have a very good team and very comfortable with them having a plan in place, but I think publicly it's important to notice that it is on our radar as well.
Shall I start? Okay. Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. Again, it depends on the type of flood. So I would say when we get those free-flowing floods where I mentioned earlier there's like 2 to 3 days lead time, you can usually predict what's going to happen. And as I showed in my presentation, a couple of the maps that showed where it was flood. So in that kind of scenario, we do have some lead time. And we can say where those encampments are going to have issues. The ice jammed ones are a little more complicated. And those are more, as the ice breaks up and moving, staff basically have their eyes on the ice jam watching it. And when it jams, then we have to respond. So when it jams, then the Lower Thames has to operate some flood control structures, and we need to be examining, areas that might potentially flood. I would say, and I'm sure the emergency services can speak well, that the Lower Thames gets asked by emergency services whether those areas are at risk, and so I am quite certain that the Chatham-Kent staff are aware of those concerns and do have them on their mind. So,
Go ahead, Eric.
Through you, Mayor. Eric Labadie, Manager of Corporate Communications. So as part of Councillor Harrigan's question, we mentioned something, or she mentioned something about what can the community do to prepare for something like this. And shameless plug, signing up for CK Alert. We just made it live today at about 3 o'clock. So right under the wire. In front of you, Council, you will see a stack of business cards. They are basically a very convenient way for you to, hand these out to residents saying, if you are concerned about receiving emergency notifications from the municipality, here's a way that you can get them directly to your phone, directly to your home phone, and to your email. So an extremely easy and convenient way for residents to receive emergency notifications. So we always are concerned about reaching as many people as possible in the shortest amount of time possible. This allows us to send text messages directly to your phone. If you don't have a device capable of receiving text messages, we can do pre-recorded phone calls. So for older residents that may not have access to a cell phone, it will call your home phone, your landline, and leave you a message saying basically, the Lower Thames Valley Conservation Authority has issued a flood notice for your area. One thing that is very convenient about this is through the technology, we are able to geolocate the exact places that we send them to. So if there are residents that are within a flood-prone area and there is some action that is required to be taken, we can send it to just those residents. So instead of getting information, secondhand, maybe through a neighbor or through rant and rave, you can get it directly from us, a trusted and reliable source, right to the device of your choosing. So yeah, if you want to check it out, it's ckalert.ca. And starting tomorrow and going forward, we're going to be promoting this quite heavily. And we're pretty excited. It's definitely a very useful tool for Chatham-Kent, and I think it will help a lot of people out in the future. So happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Councillor Harrigan?
Not any questions, Mayor Kenneth, just a plug. Eric, I was multitasking, and in the time that it took you to explain CK Alert, I was able to register for my computer. So it's a very quick registration process.
Yeah, absolutely. Very easy. And if anybody has questions, after this, feel free to shoot me an email. I'm happy to help. And if there are any residents out there that you are connected with that are a little wary of signing up for something like this, I can assure you that it is an emergency service, emergency notification service. We won't be sending out spam. We won't be sending out useless information. It will be a purpose-built and purpose-used tool for residents in times of emergency.
And Jody, if I could get you to answer the second part of Councillor Scotchy's question. He was just talking about the residents that are along the river, that just to let them know what the high level, the plan, or that there is a plan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, there is a plan. We have worked closely with fire emergency management to make sure that we do have a process in place whereby we will be able to notify any individuals who are staying down near the river, and we'll be working with them to assist in whatever way that we possibly can. So it's something that we do monitor and we are staying on top of. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next item is deputations. We have 8 deputations for items on tonight's agenda. Of those 8 deputations, we have 3 that have been emailed in. We have an email from Bev McIntosh Snowbelen and an email from Jacqueline Fobert regarding 17A farm tax ratio review. We also had an email deputation from Sue Robert regarding 18A ward boundary and council composition bylaw. All deputations were circulated to council earlier today. In person with us tonight for 17A farm tax ratio review, we have Jim Brackett, Louis Roche, Gus Turnoy, and Mark Huston. We also have Matt Marchand participating on Zoom. Up first, if in attendance, I would invite Jim Brackett to provide his deputation, and Louis Roche is followed by that. Just a reminder as well, there is a clock on the screen, and you do have 5 minutes.
Mayor Caniff and Chatham-Kent Council. My name is Jim Brackett, President of the Kent Federation of Agriculture. I represent more than 1,850 members in Chatham-Kent, an industry that continues to be this municipality's most significant economic driver. We are here this evening regarding the staff recommendation that the farm tax ratio be reinstated at the maximum provincial level of 25% by 2026 and 23.5% for the remainder of 2025. The recommendation also states that any surplus funds should be invested in rural infrastructure. This is a deceptive statement, since we all know that there is no mechanism in place to bind the municipality to increase rural spending. Staff are making these recommendations based on what they think will happen in the next assessment cycle. This is pure speculation, a very weak foundation on which to base any policy. However, assuming that staff are accurate in their speculation would mean that a 200% increase in residential values and a modest increase for farms with no impact reassessment would equate to residential taxpayers not paying for their fair share. For example, if a home increases from $200,000 to $600,000 without reassessment, that property is still only paying tax because of not having a reassessment on the $200,000 value, and hence not taxed enough. Until MPAC delivers an assessment that clearly and definitively states that houses, farms, or commercial properties have increased in value for tax purposes, there is no justification other than political for making any changes that would effectively reduce the residential tax burden and therefore increase the farm tax by increasing the farm tax burden. The numbers in the attachment show that farmers, not residents, and there's two attachments that were included in your package, that farmers, not residents, have seen significant increases in their comparative tax burden in recent years. From 2012 to 2022, it was a 174% increase in real tax dollars paid by the rural community. More importantly, using agri-food net farm income forecasts to justify increasing the property tax burden on farmers is an unjustifiable argument. Property tax is not an income tax. If your house or if your income doubles, your property tax should not double. Additionally, staff seem to have glossed over the 2024 forecast for net farm cash income, which shows a decline of 14 and a further decrease of 15 in 2025. If you look at the attachment that I included of the exact same report, only the more current years, it shows that. With the looming threat of tariffs, net farm income could decrease even farther if you were looking at net farm income. Well, this is still not a valid argument for increasing the tax burden. It will have a negative impact on our most vital industry. Staff stated that the newly formed CK Advisory Committee had been consulted, but they didn't include any of the discussions. It's not a stretch to think of how those discussions went. Ben Laforte's report on farm assessments taxes I included as an attachment. It's well worth reviewing. It was reported that the issue on Chatham-Kent Let's Talk, but they failed to give the report's results unless you go really deep into it. 77% of the respondents said no to increasing the farm tax ratio. Recently, gravel roads have been reduced. The gravel has been reduced by 25%. Dust suppression has been eliminated, all of which are a necessary part of our infrastructure. These services are paid through our farm taxes, do not justify an increase in our ratio when our services have been reduced. Studies by the OFA show that on average, for every tax dollar paid by farmers, only 60% of services are returned. In closing, the Kent Federation of Agriculture asks that you do not support these recommendations as presented by staff until we have an accurate and current assessment from MPAC with all property values for all classes known. Any changes to the farm tax ratios are unjustifiable and not equitable. Thank you.
Next up is Louis Roche, followed by Gus Turnoway.
So some of the numbers have just been said, so I'm going to go through them again anyway. Maybe they'll sink in a little more. So to Mayor Caniff and members of council, every year we seem to go through this same tax proposal. In 2023, we had a huge increase in our agriculture commodity sale prices, but with that, we had up to 300% increases in some of our crop production costs. In 2024, the commodity prices dropped by at least 50%, and our input costs have dribbled down slightly since 2023. In that same time frame, there's been 2 hourly minimum wage increases that we pay in all aspects of our operation. Every day, from your computer information and news outlets, there's plenty of information about the high cost of food. Only 5% of Ontario's land base can be used for food production. This is all the land base available for food production in Ontario. We in Chatham-Kent have the most productive land base in the world. On this land, we produce more than 200 different types of crops and vegetables. No irrigation is necessary. This is critical and unique on a worldwide basis. At the same time, we're losing 400 acres per day in Ontario of this valuable land base in Ontario. The last survey showed 319 acres a day of agricultural land lost, and that was a number of years ago. So if you drive anywhere and see industry and housing expansion in the last couple of years, this land is lost for food production forever. The Ontario Federation of Agriculture has the actual number of municipalities in the province with tax reductions. Many are a lot lower than Chatham-Kent. Check our own local municipalities that touch our border are very close, and every year only on a number of acres are picked, a number of municipalities are picked for comparison in Ontario. About 2% of the population that owns 90% of Chatham-Kent land base is paying an unfair portion of taxes that are collected here. We in agriculture are also paying education taxes on our land base. This land base has no municipal water, sewage, or garbage removal like urban centers do. And our land base pays directly for our drainage, upkeep, and infrastructure. There's no municipal cost for this. That's ours to pay for. When it comes to roads, everyone uses them. Now there is no dust control. Gravel application is being moved from 3 to 5 years. Less maintenance will also likely be a factor for our roads that are already in poor shape. We pay residential taxes on 1 acre and homes separate from the farm like everyone else. Our residential taxes have gone up. Our residential taxes have gone up 25% like everyone else since 2012. And with this increase from impact assessment, agriculture has gone up 174%. At the same time, you are now asking for agriculture area to pay more while you're cutting back. Most industries with our capital cost outlay, high risk, weather dependency, and extremely low profit margins wouldn't take a second look at this investment return. Unlike industry, we can't just pick up and move to another area to get better cost of production, lower taxes, or safer profit return. This is not available in the farming industry. If 25% tariff by the U.S. comes into effect, with this increase that you're looking at, this will affect everybody in the municipality, mostly agriculture. Thank you.
Our next deputation is Gus Turnui, and then followed by Matt Marchand on Zoom.
Mr. Mayor and Councillors, I'm Gus Turnui, the President of the Chatham-Kent Essex Christian Farmers Federation of Ontario, and I sit on the Board of Directors of the Grain Farmers of Ontario representing Chatham-Kent. You have been presented with a report from the municipality recommending an increase in the farm tax ratio. To the municipality's credit, they have provided within this report a substantial amount of data given to you outlining their reasoning for making this recommendation. The concern that I have is that the data therein suggests farms are doing very well, and although the select data is not erroneous, it misrepresents the truth and shows a lack of understanding of the agricultural sector. What data is surprisingly not included is any information as to the actual municipal costs in supporting agriculture and rural residents, and this should be seen as a red flag. The purpose of collecting property taxes is to fund the municipality. At some point, the tax dollars collected from farmland are clearly not being used to support rural residents or infrastructure required for agriculture. It's simply being used to provide a discount to residential taxes, a subsidy on housing in effect. There are at least two possible reasons that no municipal expenditure data has been included. Those being, it doesn't support the recommendation, or the information is simply not known. What is surprising to every farmer is that over the past several decades, the proportion of taxes being covered by farm taxes has steadily increased, while the portion of taxes being covered by commercial and industrial has decreased. And despite all the housing projects that have happened in Chatham-Kent over the past years, the proportion of residential taxes has remained essentially flat. And every rural resident notices that every time budget reductions are required, the first place the municipality makes recommendations to cut is in the rural areas. Most cost-cutting measures have been made on the backs of rural Chatham-Kent. As far as the health of agriculture, the numbers in this report should be giving you a great concern, although they have been portrayed in a positive light, hiding the reality. Farm income is a very complex calculation. The reported value doesn't necessarily account for how many people are working on the farm. The value doesn't account for how much of that income is a result of insurance payouts. The value reported is an average and not a median. Understanding the difference between those two terms is extremely important. As an example, if you take 4 farms, 3 small farms making $50,000 and 1 large operation, let's say a greenhouse making $1 million a year, the average would be $287,000. The median, however, would only be $50,000. As the size of large farms increases, the difference between the median and the average can become very large, and the number of total farmers will decrease. Large farms can maintain their profitability due to economies of scale, where the small farms require off-farm income to subsidize their operations. About 90% of the farms in Chatham-Kent are recognized grain farms. The report notes that the biggest driver of the increases in farm receipts has been growth in the livestock sector, not the grain sector. In truth, over the last 2 years, the grain sector has qualified to receive payments on risk management insurance programs because the cost of production exceeds the values of the commodities. And no agricultural economist has forecast anything to suggest this trend is expected to change. Everyone here is aware of the effects of inflation. Those effects made your recent budget deliberations very difficult. If inflation exceeds the rate of growth of farm income, what would the likely outcome be? The very large farms maintain their profitability because of economies of scale, while the very small farms cease to exist. The number of farmers decreases, but the average profit numbers remain strong or may even grow. It takes a very good understanding of farming to recognize the farm incomes presented in this report should be concerning, and anyone with that understanding knows it is not painting a good picture. In my lifetime, the number of farms has been cut in half, and it's statistically possible that within my lifetime I will see them cut in half again. If you believe that the municipality has a firm understanding of agriculture, then I would understand why you would consider to support the recommendation of this report. But if you have any doubt that they may not have a full understanding of what's happening in the largest economic driver of this municipality, and you believe that all of the farm organizations speaking to you today may have a better understanding of that situation, you should be very concerned about the validity of that recommendation, and I would suggest you do not support it. Thank you.
Up next on Zoom is Matt Marchand, followed by Mark Huston. Matt, at this time, you're welcome to unmute yourself and begin your deputation.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can. Thank you.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Your worship, members of Chatham-Kent Council, thank you for having me over Zoom. My name is Matt Marchand, Public Affairs and Policy Analyst at the Ontario Greenhouse Vegetable Growers, and I'm here on behalf of our Executive Director, Richard Lee, and our 170 farms across Ontario growing cucumbers, tomatoes, and peppers in over 4,100 acres of greenhouse. In the Chatham-Kent area alone, there are 11 greenhouse operations that grow in 754 acres of greenhouse, contributing over 6,000 jobs. Let me say that again, 6,000 jobs through the full value chain. Jobs that are filled with some international workers, but mainly a domestic workforce to support activities on farm that include packing, research, innovation, management, finance, executives, pallet box companies, lawyers, accountants, and transportation companies. These are all taxpayers contributing to the economic development of Chatham-Kent. I'm here on behalf of our members regarding agenda item 17A, which we are talking about, that aims to reinstate the maximum level of 25% for farm tax ratio over the next 2 years, with immediate increases to 23.5% for the remainder of 2025. Farming operations continue to face one of the highest levels of inflationary pressures. They also face municipal challenges and taxation from all levels of government. This additional increase will once again add to these inflationary pressures, further jeopardizing future investments, domestic food production, affordability, and food security. The municipality's hyper-focus on residential development and infrastructure needs will further undermine the future of farming and investments in the Chatham-Kent area. With these residential developments will come additional costs to support new subdivisions that will be borne on all other businesses, residents, and farm operations. Costs that will come in the form of development charges and unnecessary bylaws that aim to unfairly tax existing taxpayers to support new residential growth. A burden that unfairly taxes those that have chosen this municipality to operate their business, reside, and farm. Everyone has been exposed to inflationary pressures. The difference is that farming operations have been hit with these added costs all at once. Labor, energy, fuel, carbon tax, input costs, and now the impending threat of tariffs that has accompanied with many uncertainties that will detrimentally impact the current and future investments in Ontario. I would ask your worship and members of council, is this the right time? Given everything that's going on, including possibly tomorrow, is this the right time to be discussing this? We ask the municipality to reconsider increasing the farm tax ratio as recommended by staff to protect farming operations from the ongoing inflationary pressures, further jeopardizing future investments, domestic food production, affordability, and food security. At a critical point and a pivotal point in history, further threatening the impact of food affordability would be a disservice to the constituents you represent who are already battling to manage the cost of living increases that we are all facing. Your worship, members of council, please consider making this municipality friendly to future investments, prosperity, success, and farm friendliness. We thank you for taking the time to listen this evening, and we look forward to working with you to generate more investment and jobs in Chatham-Kent. Thank you very much.
Our last deputation is Mark Huston.
Good evening, Mayor Caniff, Chatham-Kent Council. Thank you for allowing me to make this deputation on tonight's agenda, item 17A. My name is Mark Houston. I'm here on behalf of a 7th-generation farm located in the northern area of the municipality. Our farm was established in 1830 and has grown with ebbs and flows to the size it currently is, supporting myself, my cousin, my father, and my uncle, along with our families. Between the families working on our farm, we have 3 people working full-time on our operation, 1 part-time, and then 5 working full-time in jobs within the municipality. My purpose here is twofold. 1, to support the excellent deputation by the Kent Federation of Agriculture, and secondly, to add some more specific observations which I believe have some bearing on the discussion tonight. While our farm has been around for a very long time, I will focus on the last 10 years because that's what my accounting software allows me to do. The impacts their property taxes have had in that case. Our farm represents what has become an average-sized farm. We're not large, we're about 1,300 acres, about 800 of that is owned. Over the years I'm referencing, we have not added any properties to our farm, so the comparisons are like for like. In 2013, our farm wrote checks to the municipality for property taxes totaling $14,300. In 2024, we wrote checks totaling $57,000. Over this time, we've seen increases in many of the costs of our farm, but none have seen the rapid and, from our perspective, uncontrollable increases that our property taxes have. When we have increases in our commodity prices, are influencing our fertilizer, our equipment costs, we can adjust those. We can mitigate that, spread it out year over year. With property taxes, we don't have that ability. I've been lucky enough to serve as a director on many boards over the years, and one of the most difficult tasks is justifying values to the funders of those boards. This task is difficult enough when it is a consistent draw, but when those members see an increase of nearly 4 times the previous amount, things become even more challenging. As costs rise, there is an understanding that I have that our taxes will also rise, as they do increase with the standard mill rate. What creates more difficulty for our farm is justifying how those expenses balance with the surfaces going forward. They're forecast to decrease, not increase. For these reasons, I have difficulty supporting the increase in the farm tax ratio from 22% to 23.5% for the remainder of 2025 and to 25% for 2026, and would like to see council not support this recommendation of staff. Thank you very much for your time.
The next item is the consent agenda. Items pulled from the consent agenda include 16A, Linear Infrastructure Capital Construction Projects 2025 update. That's been pulled by Councillor Finn, Councillor Jubenville, as well as a presentation from staff. Item 17A, Farm Tax Ratio Review. That's been pulled by Councillor C. McGregor, Doyle, Wright, Harrigan, Sakachi, and Jubenville. Item 18A, Ward Boundary and Council Composition Bylaw. That's been pulled by Councillors Sakachi and Jubenville. Item 18C, 2024 Information and Privacy Commissioner Statistical Report has been pulled by Councillor Harrigan. And item 18D, motion by Councillor Bondi regarding the Municipal Accountability Act 2024 has been pulled by Councillor Bondi, Crew, and Harrigan. Remaining on the consent agenda are items 15A, 18B, 19A, and 19B.
Councillor Finn and Councillor Thompson, can I get you to move the consent agenda, please?
Happy to move it.
And second.
Any questions? Seeing none, we'll put it to vote.
Missing somebody? Councillor Bondi's absent. That motion carries 15-0.
Got item 16, Infrastructure and Engineering Services.
Item 16A is the Linear Infrastructure Capital Construction Projects 2025 update, and I'll turn it over to the Director of Engineering for a presentation.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. I'm Marissa Mascara-Amiot, the Director of Engineering, and I'm here before you tonight to provide an update on our infrastructure capital construction projects for 2025. The Infrastructure and Engineering Services Department is responsible for delivering a wide range of capital infrastructure projects each year to support the community's needs and ensure the longevity of our municipal assets. These projects span roads, bridges, stormwater, parks, facilities, waste management, etc. The road and bridge maintenance and rehabilitation work programs are some of the largest asset management activities that the municipality carries out annually. The breakdown of these are shown on the screen and are discussed in the report that's before you, but just to provide a few highlights, across the municipality we have approximately 3,500 kilometers of right-of-ways. And within these right-of-ways we have approximately $3.58 billion worth of road assets and approximately $1.16 billion in replacement costs or value of our bridge assets. As noted on the screen, the large majority of these are within our rural areas. And when we refer to our urban and rural areas, we're following the definitions in our official plan, which have defined boundaries for our urban areas, which are further subdivided. But the general kind of distinction is that urban areas are more built up areas. They have a higher density of persons per area, whereas our rural areas have lower population concentrations. This table here is from our 2025 budget update this past fall, which highlights the capital investment for all of our different asset types. The municipality undertakes a process to develop our multi-year capital budgets, and we're currently working on building out our 10-year forecast based on the asset management planning work that's been underway for both our core and non-core assets over the last few years. For our linear infrastructure specifically, projects require pre-planning, design, and then depending on the scope of work, they may require public consultation, regulatory approvals, environmental permitting, et cetera. So our larger projects tend to be multi-year processes. Project-specific budgets are determined initially through high-level cost estimates based on concepts and feasibility studies, and as projects progress through the planning and design stages, the project scopes further refined, and accordingly the project cost estimates become more refined, allowing for more precise budget allocations and gradual reductions in our project contingencies. While efforts are made during the design and procurement phase of each project to mitigate the potential for cost overruns, project contingencies are still carried through the construction phase as a best practice to account for project risks, including unforeseen conditions, scope adjustments that may be required, etc. And throughout the project lifecycle, we employ financial management practices such as cost tracking, risk assessments, and contract management measures to manage the expenditures within approved budgets. So implementation of our multi-year capital budget has allowed us to establish overall project budgets, including our consulting fees, contingencies, et cetera, as I just touched on. There were also updates to purchasing bylaw and reserve fund policies recently. These factor into how we deliver our infrastructure projects. Recent updates include revisions to staff delegated and council approved authorities for purchases and contract awards. So in accordance with establishing a multi-year budget, which allows us to consider the full lifespan of a project from planning to implementation, the revisions to the purchasing bylaw also allows for staff to assign tasks within these approved budgets in a more timely manner under delegated authorities for lower dollar values. And we recently implemented a professional services roster, which also allows us to assign project work under a more timely process for procurements for lower values up to $150,000 across 30 categories for design. This slide provides an overview of the annual spending on our core linear infrastructure assets over the last few years. Our spending has been in the range of approximately $40 million per year, with some variation based on when work was started versus completed and how those were accounted for year to year. As shown, the budget for 2025 is approximately $80 million. This increase represents a few items highlighted in the report and in the appendix, including continuing to build out some of our annual road programs, which we'll touch on in a few slides. One piece that I did want to highlight is that $80 million for our 2025 budget doesn't necessarily mean that we're expecting to spend $80 million fully, but this would represent work that's committed to construction projects which would be initiated this year and potentially continuing into next year as well. To look back at 2024, this slide highlights the spending on our core assets in 2024. There were 35 major capital linear infrastructure construction programs and projects that were initiated or underway through 2024. This included annual pavement contracts like crack sealing, typical pavement measures, and alternative measures such as Golden Place recycling, sewer separation and road reconstruction projects in Chatham, Wallsburg, and Richtown, Improvements at the Kyle Drive South and Tweedsmuir roundabout, initiation of the Queens Line and Merlin intersection roundabout and bridge rehab projects, as well as completion of the first annual water main relining program in Wallaceburg. The majority of these projects were substantially completed in 2024. Some continue through the winter or will be resuming this spring, including some of our road reconstruction projects where underground work and base asphalt work are typically completed in one construction season, and then final restoration is typically completed the following spring. This slide summarizes, as mentioned, that we had 35 projects initiated or underway through 2024 for a total value of $36 million, which collectively was completed at $4 million under the approved budget for those projects. Looking ahead to 2025, the 2025 linear infrastructure work plan includes an increase to 60 construction programs and projects, which includes several key items. Continuing to build out our annual programs, such as the annual pavement work, rehab work, continuing sewer separation road reconstruction programs, implementing the gravel road conversion program beginning this year, completion of the Queens Line and Merlin intersection and bridge rehab projects, realignment of Talbot Trail east of Coatsworth Road, water main relining program in various locations in Ridgetown, construction of the Laurentia Drain and Rosalie Roberts drainage improvements projects, and several key slope stabilization projects, including along Thames Street, Short Line, and Glasgow. And that concludes the information I have to share with you today.
Councillor Finn and Councillor Juveville, can I put this on the floor? Or actually, we'll go questions first, and I'll put the motion. Councillor Finn, did you have a question?
Just one quick one. Thank you for the report. Every time we get calls during springtime about potholes and roads, it was interesting to find out because when I explain what happened during amalgamation with provincial roadways, can you kind of just advise the public how much was downloaded to the municipality with regards to roadways and bridges? And then how much did we receive and how much do we receive now?
Thank you. Through the mayor to the councillor, I'll take a shot at that, and I believe Mr. Quinton will also want to maybe touch on this subject. Back in 1998, the municipality had a transfer of 274 kilometers of roadways from the province, and that also included 68 bridges and 322 culverts. At that time, we received a one-time funding of $11 million. Those assets at that time were valued at about $354 million. If I was to look at the slides that were provided to you here tonight, you know, that accounts for about 8% of our entire road network, majority being in the rural network. It also accounts for about 29% of our bridges and culverts. And if you were to inflate those numbers based on our latest asset management plans, the value of those assets are no longer $354 million. They're about $600 to $700 million. So, you know, we inherited a very large amount of assets from the province at that time with a very little financial transfer. I believe, I don't know if Gord wants to touch upon the financial aspect.
Just at the corresponding time, approximately 1998, 1999, there were several other changes that happened through the Mike Harris government at the time on who does what project that they were looking at then. That changed the funding formulas for lots of things. So when you talk about bridges, roads and bridges in rural areas, and the former townships of Chatham-Kent and how their taxes were, just happens to be before amalgamation, but due to the same changes that happened around the exact same time. A lot of infrastructure projects which received between 50 to 90% provincial grants. That was for major bridge replacements, even for fire trucks and arenas and other infrastructure. There was always a large portion, particularly in small, less dense rural areas, of funding coming from the province. That all changed in the formulas that happened near the same time as amalgamation. So not blamed on, this happened province-wide, but, so not blaming anything on amalgamation here, but it just happened to be at the same time. So funding was a lot different 30 years ago on our bridge replacement in Chatham-Kent.
Thank you. So it's not just about the roadways. The infrastructure is everything. If somebody wants to know if there's a project in their area because roads is a big thing right now, wondering if the roads are being looked at, where can they go to look that up?
Thank you for the question, through you, Mr. Mayor. So we have an open book website where residents can go, and I believe it's linked in the report, hyperlinked, and it'll take you right to the page where residents can go and see all of the projects that have been identified in our multi-year budget. And these are updated with our roads list. So when we confirm annually which roads we're going to be doing in these packages, those are updated and provided there. We also have a construction projects webpage, which provides a map layout of those locations as well. Those are kind of linked together. So there's a lot of information on our website about current projects. If residents have questions, if something's not identified, they can reach out through CK311. We have questions. It is a multi-year budget process that we get into, and then annually we're reconfirming what packages we're delivering each year. So road may be not reflected this year, but it may be in the current or future forecasts. We definitely can take those questions, but there's lots of information on our planned projects online.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
Councillor Juvenville, followed by Councillor B. McGregor.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. I just have a quick question. You actually had a slide. Thank you for the report, by the way. And you had a slide up there. Basically, I'm just going to read. Approved funding for the 2024 infrastructure program was approximately $40 million, and collectively the projects were completed at approximately $4 million under budget. So I'm just curious, where does that $4 million go? Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So that funding would be returned to the reserves to fund future projects.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor B. McGregor.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Caniff. Appreciate the report, and, being here for a while, I think it's something we all kind of knew was going on, but maybe didn't have the sort of easy to digest graphs and numbers. And it's pretty stark when you look at that first slide that, we have 3.5 times the value of roadways in rural areas versus urban areas, and almost 5 times the value of bridges and culverts, and that's a ton of infrastructure. And I know you kind of touched on what we consider urban and rural with like the density discussion, but maybe like for some examples. So when we're talking about urban infrastructure, we're even talking about like Merlin and Shrewsbury and like very small like hamlets or secondary urban centers, right?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct. So those are defined as either primary, secondary urban areas or hamlets in our official plan. And we actually, as well online, have on our GIS public-facing maps, residents can go there to see those boundaries and see what's considered within those urban defined areas, including those hamlets versus our broader rural areas as well.
Great, and I think that's helpful to look at. So even if you backed out like the larger urban centers like Chatham and Wallaceburg, that like stark difference between the amount of infrastructure, it's even greater, right? And it was really helpful, the question from Councillor Finn about like the funding model prior to 1998. So like how did we make up that difference? Like 50 to 90% on bridge projects, on road projects, that's a huge amount. When you look at this value, it's a huge amount of money. So like where did that materialize from after? Like did taxes go up just in those areas? Was that shared across Chatham-Kent?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the intent at the time was to be overall revenue neutral to municipalities for all the services that they provide. We picked up paying more for ambulance services, for example, and like it was just policing was another one. So there was a give and take, but where the other change used to be that farms did pay 100% of the taxes, but it was the province that rebated the 75%. So all these changes sort of came together at the same time. But since then, of course, the costs, as Marissa and Edward have explained, are just continue to go up. Our asset management plan will be providing some more exact data in the next couple months of what our costs are now. But basically those grants for infrastructure dried up, and yes, we get minuscule amount from the province and federal governments for infrastructure, but not near like what was before. So it's being put on the property taxpayers to pay that increasing costs. So what was perhaps in theory, even trade at the time, has gone terribly wrong against municipalities across Ontario.
Yeah, and I think that's important to note, and we should say it often. We say it when we have the police discussions, but it's not that amalgamation caused this issue. It was, a massive transfer in the way that our community is funded, and it's been a disadvantage to not just rural residents, to every resident that pays property taxes that now have to fund projects and life cycle budgets of assets that were previously paid by the provincial government. There's quite a number of associated with investment in bridges and culverts that we notice on that project. And in the past, I think that's been a huge area of focus. I know there was a lot of discussion around years ago what was the bridge divestment list. So we had this long list of bridges that might be abandoned that we thought maybe we couldn't fund, and there's been a real push to invest in those and get bridges off the divestment list. And I know I've heard publicly, and people have posted that we underinvest in rural infrastructure, but I think when you look at that list, it's a pretty stark difference from where it was in 2014 when I first saw it. Can we comment on what that list looks like now? Do we still have rural bridges that are listed for future divestment? Have we fully funded that now? Have we got those bridges off the divestment list, and what does that look like?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So from that 2013 divestment list, 4 of those bridges were divested. I believe 15 of those were rehabilitated or replaced since that time. And then there are 4 of them that are under study or design right now for rehabilitation or replacement. And 2 of them are being considered for future. They don't have planned work at this time.
Right, and I think that's pretty remarkable investment in turning that around in 10 years from a huge divestment list that we were told would have a big impact on communities to now we're not divesting any of those bridges. And related to that, we talk about our asset management plan often. What categories of our asset management plan right now are the highest funded when we think about roads, bridges, gravel roads, fleet infrastructure, those types of things? That's a tough test question, maybe.
That's a tough test question. Thank you, through the mayor. I would say that they're all underfunded. Mm-hmm. And when we come back to you with our asset management plan, we'll come back to you with our core assets, which are the roads, the bridges, the water, wastewater, and storm. And that number is significantly higher in terms of asset value than council would have seen last time. I think the last general number given the council is that 50% of our assets were funded. I would say that when we come back to you with the new and updated values, it'll be less than that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just filling in for Mayor Caniff, and I'm going to pass it back over to Mayor Caniff.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Chair. If I have a motion regarding this this package, if you could put it up. Okay, I'm going to read the motion first, and then I guess, Mr. Chair, if we can get a seconder. The staff report back on an investment debenture plan of approximately $30 million to accelerate the conversion of gravel roads in Chatham-Kent.
Moved by Mayor Caniff and seconded by Councillor B. McGregor.
So seconded.
I'll move it back for comments. Mayor Caniff.
So first off, I'm looking for a report, and it's kind of some creative way of thinking. When we look at, we're going to be spending $2 million a year paving roads, and we're looking and saying, yeah, that does 2-3 kilometers. What this proposes is that we look at taking a debenture and paying it for over the next X number of years, but put the roads in place now. So deliver an improved rural transportation network off the bat. And I'll leave it to the report to say how fast can we accelerate it. But some of the big benefits to this is that we're going to secure more favorable pricing. So if we're going out every year to the market and we're asking 2-3 whatever we're asking every year versus a significant amount more, we'll likely get better pricing. The other key piece is that when you look at the inflation rate we've been experiencing in roads, they've been 8 to 10% over the last 5 years. So even if you use 7%, in 10 years, a road that costs $1 million to do will cost $2 million. So by doing this, we're going to lock in the price at today's dollars and be able to put a lot more roads in place that are either tar and chip or paved. Leave it to the report to determine where the roads in the rural areas will be, as well as will save costs of maintenance of gravel. I mean, a lot of the roads are going to be ones that are significantly in rough shape. So it's an opportunity to put some dollars in and improve the rural, as we've heard, how important the rural agriculture business is to Chatham-Kent. This will help along the way. And the other key piece is that it generally be covered off through the existing budget. I mean, again, we're spending $2 million a year. We'll expedite those costs, but I think we'll be saving a pile of costs, both in what we can get in the value today and saving what's going to escalate to in the future. So, and be able to take advantage of the favorable rates, and we may need stimulus as well, as far as jobs and those things that provided as well. So with that, I will, I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. I'll open up to questions we have a motion on the floor. If there's any questions from council. Councillor Doyle.
Not really a question, but actually it's funny, during the presentation I was thinking the same thing, that we need to speed this up because of the exact reasons you just said. We can get a way better value for our money now than we can years down the road. So I think this is a great idea.
Seeing no other questions from council, we'll put it to vote.
That motion carries 16-0.
We'll go to item 17, Finance, Budget, Information Technology, and Transformation.
Item 17A is the farm tax ratio review.
Councillor C. McGregor.
Thank you, and through the mayor. I've asked to actually to replace the recommendations with a new motion. So before I start and explain, I'll read you the motion that I would like to be brought forward. I'd like to move that the farm tax ratio remain status quo at 22% until after the impact tax reassessment pause is removed by the provincial government and updated assessment data can be analyzed and a report be brought back to the next term of council. If I could get a seconder, then I'll explain.
Councillor Wright.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Thank you, and again, through the mayor. I've really mocked this up based on everything that's happened tonight, so I'll try and pull this off the best that I can and explain why I'm doing this. I can no longer support the recommendations, even though I was the councillor that brought it back in August. And I hope when I conclude that you will agree with my thinking and that you will approve this new motion. First off, so much has changed since August, including what we have now just received from the mayor in a request and a report to come to council. Two, it was also announced today that the U.S. is going forward to implement tariffs to be placed upon our exports to the U.S., tariffs that will also affect our farmers. Also, during the budget process this past fall, we moved forward with recommendations that stemmed from a report that came to us from the Manager of Engineering to do with the gravel road conversion prioritization framework, a motion that was passed by Councillor Scacci to change the average time of topping road gravel from a 3-year cycle to a 4-year cycle. This amounted to about a $1.56 million change in the budget, and Councillor Scacci at that time moved to allocate $1 million of that to go to the road gravel conversion program, and that the remaining would go to lower the tax base. A second motion that stemmed from the budget was to remove the use of dust suppressant on gravel roads, which would save the municipality about $1.4 million. Basically, $1.4 million to lower the base budget to get us what would be considered by council an acceptable tax increase of 4.99. So based on my calculations, and I could be wrong, as I gathered my calculations from a number of our council reports, And if I read this report correctly, the tax levy impact by changing the farm percentage rate in 2025 to 23.5 would be an increase, which would be the first increase, would gain us about 1.1 million with an increase in farm tax rate about 5.81%. And the 25% in 2026 would be another 1.2 million, or an increase in 5.39. So a total over the 2 years would be 11.51 increase to rural tax rate or the rural taxpayer. And you know, with all of the unknowns at this point of time, it has led me to change my position on these recommendations. In my mind, and I can stand to be corrected, believe me, through the budget process, we've pulled 1.4 million out of dust suppression and 1 million for gravel conversion, changing these for the 3 to 4 years. That's 2.4 million that directly affects the service levels that are being provided to our rural communities. I also note in this report on page 7, the impact per 100,000 assessment. 100,000 of property tax assessment is illustrated for farm, residential, and commercial classes. The table reads that it would be an annual impact in dollars of an increase for farms of about $24 for 100,000 of assessment. I don't know if any of you or some of you understand the price of an acre of farmland, but 100,000 might be 2 or 3 acres, I'm guessing today. So today, a 200-acre is basically considered, 200-acre farm is basically considered a hobby farm. A typical farm homestead of 200 acres is not even enough to raise a family on. A 200-acre farm based on 100,000 of assessment could be assessed as much as $2,000 increase if I'm calculating things right. And like I said, I could stand wrong because I try and pull things in maybe a little simpler way of trying to understand these increases to myself. So one last thought I want to leave you with, and this comes from the gravel road conversion prioritization framework. There is a table that lists the whole life cost by scenario. So in the report, it states that gravel to asphalt would cost about $37,000 a kilometer. Surface treatment to tar and chip would actually be a little bit higher to $39,000. So if you look at the fact that we put $1 million to conversion for this year, and divide that out by that dollars, that equals about 26 kilometers for asphalt and about 25 kilometers if we were to go to tar and chip. And, you know, so I compliment the mayor on his motion tonight. This might be a much better solution because, you know, at 1,785 kilometers, you know, it could take about 67 years at 26,000 to do a conversion of this. So in my mind, we've already cut $2.5 million to the services received by rural taxpayers, and therefore I ask that you support the new motion to continue at status quo until the completion of the property tax assessment can be brought, and that this go to a future budget deliberations in the next term of council.
Councillor Wright, followed by Councillor Doyle.
Well spoken. I support it 100%. Thank you.
Councillor Doyle, followed by Councillor Harrigan.
Thanks for the modified motion, Councillor McGregor. I think it's a good one. I think a lot of us have said around this horseshoe when this debate has came up that we want to wait till the impact new assessments come out, the reassessment comes out. So I think this is a great idea. Thanks.
Councillor Harrigan, followed by Councillor Scacchi.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. So also supportive of the new motion as it is on the floor. I just want to acknowledge and maybe call out too that the staff reports that we get are often in response to council direction. And sometimes I feel when I hear our deputations that it's, you know, there's some target around like CK staff are saying X, Y, or Z. And I don't think it's intentional by our members of the public, and I don't think it's intentional in the motions that we have, but I wanted to acknowledge the work of Gord and Matt and team in doing the report, doing the engagement, especially because it's complicated and important work for us to do and part of developing our tax policies. And as Councillor McGregor duly noted, tax policy is quite complicated, and it's difficult to understand. Even the ratio conversation is hard to kind of just wrap your head around. It's not as cut and dry as it could be. So wanted to acknowledge that work that staff are doing, and also acknowledge some of the great deputations, not just from organizations, but from local farmers themselves, who also sent an email in. The other thing I just wanted to comment, if I can steal the floor for 30 more seconds, is sometimes I feel like we get ourselves into these conversations because of our appetite around budget to get that number down and to lower that number. We often hit infrastructure first because that is the biggest pot of money when we look through the budget binder. And as we saw from Marissa's presentation today, infrastructure is largely rural in our communities. So when we're looking at some of those low-hanging $1 million budget lines, thinking about how to get those numbers lower, we also have to acknowledge that oftentimes we're hurting rural members, farmers, and residents in more ways that they might feel in seeing a couple of dozen dollars added to their tax bills for average homeowners. So I just wanted to acknowledge that as well.
Councillor Sakatchi, followed by Councillor Jubenville.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. I just originally pulled the report just because I wasn't going to support it, but I will be supporting this motion. So there's no comments further from myself.
Councillor Jubenville, followed by Councillor B. McGregor.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. I, as well, was not going to support it, but I am in full support of this. So thank you, Councillor McGregor, for bringing this forward.
Councillor B. McGregor.
Yeah, I did have a couple of questions. And I think it's important to note that we say it every year. We have this discussion because we have to have this discussion. So we approve tax ratios every year. So it's not like it's some new recommendation that's just maybe based on a motion. There was a motion this time, but traditionally every April we go through this process following our budget process. So, it's not something that gets referred back to budget. It's not something that we can kick around and not decide to do. We have to have the conversation. And one ratio affects every other ratio. So when we think about these tariffs coming tonight or tomorrow or in a month or whenever, we have other tax classes that may be significantly impacted, industrial, commercial. So we may need flexibility in those areas as well, just like we showed to the agricultural community when this ratio was first changed. So I think, pigeonholing ourselves into saying we're not going to discuss this next April when we have to, we should every year, I think maybe isn't the right course. I think it's fine to say if we don't want to change it this year, we don't change it this year, and we have the discussion again next year in the economic context, in the investment context, after we see what happens at budget. So I wouldn't support the motion as is. I'm actually not sure we can do that because I do think we need to approve it every year anyway. So I think we would need to look at it next year anyway after our budget process. But just for context, I did have a couple of questions about the impacts of those changes. So it is tough to wrap our heads around a ratio. And it is maybe a little bit difficult for people that don't see tax bills from farms or tax bills from businesses or residential tax bills, how that works. So the original proposed change to like 23.5%, what type of impact does that have on, say, the old traditional 100-acre farm with a residential property on it?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There was a couple of scenarios that we worked out ahead of time between Brock and I, and he had asked some questions. So on, hang on, I got the. So we took a couple of examples, one being a 100-acre farm in Dover Township with a house. That house valued at $214,000. The farmland's valued at $1.4 million. So in that scenario, the farm taxes would go up $267 and the house would go down $31.
Right, and those are 2016 assessment numbers too, right? So we're not talking about like recent sale numbers, like that $216,000 house is no longer $216,000.
Right, and I heard a reference earlier about the land assessment per acre.
Yeah.
Those are 2016 values as well, so it's not as simple as what the market value is today or what the most recent sale of.
Yeah, and I think that's the challenging aspect of this discussion as well. And I'm not holding my breath for an impact reassessment. We talk about it every year, and it just keeps not showing up. What type of impact does that have on a and again, 2016 numbers, a $500,000 value assessed farm versus a $500,000 commercial property.
Yeah, so as I referenced, thank you, Mr. Mayor. As I referenced in the report, a small business pays about just under 9 times the taxes on a similarly appraised property. In that case, we would be looking at a farm in a $500,000 farm would pay about $1,700 in taxes versus about $14,500 for a commercial business.
Yeah, so I think that that's an important thing to note as well. So, I mean, we certainly, in the past have had successful lobbying by agriculture organizations to really display the type of financial challenges that they're up against in the context of, economic reality and how this would impact their business. But it's also important to note it impacts everyone else's business. And they may not be here, they may not be lobbying, but we represent them as well. So when we have these tax ratio discussions, it's about all those tax classes. So I think that those are important numbers to understand, and to understand those businesses exist in every ward, in every community. Those residential taxpayers exist in every ward and every community as well. So it feels like an easy thing to say we don't want to raise one group's taxes, but you're telling every other group it's that their expenses don't carry the same value to you. So I think that we have that conversation around here, and it's a tough conversation to have. I grew up in a farming community. My dad's a last generation farmer. We talk about the disappearance of family farms. It happened to my family. But those conversations have to happen, and we have to recognize that it does impact everyone. And while we can have that conversation here, I think the most important thing to remember is the reason this is such a challenge is because of what happened in 1998 and 1999. So, staff maybe politically can't say it, but I will. The provincial government, financially neglected rural Ontario. And we deal with that outcome here. And it's easy to have those conversations here, but I think that we need to make sure that we're all putting the same effort into lobbying the province to get fair and equitable funding for these types of projects. We see massive investments by other levels of government in auto industry subsidies, in other economic drivers. Agriculture is an economic driver for us, and those types of programs and funding should be used to help that industry as well. And that's a discussion outside of farm tax ratios, but I think is an area that we need to put more emphasis on as well. So I won't be supporting this motion just because I know we should be reviewing it next year. There's going to be new context. Who knows, maybe I'm wrong and next month impact numbers come out, but I don't think I am. So I think that we should make sure that we're reviewing that next year again.
Your Worship, if we can perhaps ask Mr. Quinton to just comment on the question about whether or not we have to review this annually, and also perhaps some information on the timing of the province with respect to reassessment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So yes, technically, every April, you will be receiving a tax policy report that also include all the other ratios that we're looking at, multi-res, industrial, commercial, and the like. So that will be coming. What this motion would mean is that we will bring recommendations to keep the farm tax ratio at 22% until we get that impact reassessment. Why I agree with it coming to next council, because there is zero chance that reassessment will be done to bring back to this council, because we're talking April 2026 is the last tax report that this council, tax policy report that this council will approve, and there is zero chance of reassessment being done and implemented prior to that date, where we can have the data to do the analysis that is what has been the actual change in both farm class, but also our residential assessments, for example, we know have tremendous shifts. So that in reality, that does shift it at least to April 2027 for a decision, and perhaps to 2028. You asked me to comment on the provincial timeline. They have begun the review that they announced way over a year ago. They have started it. They've hired up the staff. It is starting, and then of course election campaign came on, And so it was radio silence for 3 months now. I expect it to ramp up that process over the summer, but I expect that to be a 12-month review when it starts. Unless the province provides other direction now that they've reformed the government, I do expect that process to begin shortly.
Councilor McGrail.
Sure, thank you. Through you, the Mayor, I think this question is for Bruce. Bruce, do we have any incentives that we offer to the agricultural community? CIP is what I'm thinking.
Through the CIP, it only apply if it's related to agricultural, industrial uses, kind of similar to other industrial uses, but nothing specifically incentives for,
Right, okay,
agriculture.
and that's what I'm kind of getting at. So there is some incentives we offer other communities, we'll say, that we don't, that the rural community does not partake in or can partake in. So I think that's very poignant question, but I also just want to go back to Councillor McGregor's thought of, when we put up and we think about like a $500,000 farm entity compared to a commercial. I'm not sure that's an apples or oranges to oranges comparison, because I'm pretty sure the commercial, their profits and the availability and the what am I saying? I'm lost for words here, but what I'm saying is that commercial properties have more increased profits than the farm. We're tied, agriculture is tied to equipment, tied to environmental ministries, and there's a lot more hoops coming down and have been. And since I've been in that, I've walked away from the agricultural industry, but, it was a tough go on what, to even plant and how to plant and what equipment, that you're forced to use to do that. So there's definitely more money and costs, I believe, involved in the agricultural, where the potential for profit is less than the commercial industry. So I think I am going to absolutely support this motion. And going forward, I think it's the right thing, because I think, when that impact assessment does come, it might enlighten us either way. And I think that's the proper time to have this discussion. So thank you.
Councillor McGregor, final thoughts.
Thank you, and thank you for all the comments. And Councillor McGregor, you obviously, as you pointed out, understanding tax ratio is extremely difficult for, say, the normal layman. We are not all accountants around the table, and so it is a very different way that we might work towards understanding tax ratio. As you heard, like I said, I was quite happy, could be corrected on some of my thoughts and how I worked at it, but that's how I get to the end and figure out the answers for myself. So I do appreciate it. I hope it's supported, and I would just reiterate that after MPAC assessment comes out and to the next council, because by the time we get there next year, everybody will be going into re-election mode, and it's not going to be an easy budget to get through at that point of time, regardless. So I think that I think I've put our administration through enough of a workout to get us to bring this report, and that maybe we could direct their efforts in another manner next year. So thank you.
I noticed that Councillor Crew has a question. Councillor McGregor, are you good with her following you? Yep. Okay. Councillor Crew, go ahead.
I'm just trying to understand the motion. Farm tax ratios are not easy. So Gord, maybe you can help. So if we pass this, I'm trying to understand. So if we leave it the same until after MPAC does the reassessment, which could be Lord knows when. So we're going to pause it until then, but then I'm just, whatever happens in today's economy with the tariffs and all of those things, and maybe we need to come back and someone else, another tax class needs relief. Would that mean that we have to leave it at the 22% when we shift it? Now, I understand it's revenue neutral, right? Doesn't matter, money just shifts from class to class. So if we leave the farmers at 22%, and then we want to make another class at 22%, would that come from residential taxpayers? The widow on Willomac, we know where that came from, but can you explain that?
Yeah.
What happens if we pass this?
Yes,
and
I
then
think I can help you
things-
with that. It's
Yes.
a little bit of a circular argument. Because everything goes back to the residential rate, which is set at a ratio of 1 by legislation. So residential never moves. It's everybody else is moving in comparison to them. So for example, if you were to give the commercial class a reduction, currently they pay about 8.5 times what a farm would pay per 100,000 of assessment. Let's say because of tariffs, whatever, you were to, council were to reduce that in April. That goes on to the residential class, raising what needs to be collected from that, and therefore the 22% would be a pushover to the farm class too, because it's a circular argument. Everything goes back. If you put it onto residential, it gets shared back out to everyone again. So lowering industrial class would have an increase on the farm class, but this is saying for now we plan on keeping this at 22%.
Okay, thank you. That was helpful.
Councillor Seymour, you have anything else to add after that, or no? You're good? With that, we'll put it to vote.
That motion carries 13-3.
We'll move to item 18, corporate services.
Item 18A is the ward boundary and council composition bylaw.
Councillor Sakachi in Juvenville, can I get you to put this on the floor, please?
Put it on the floor, Mayor Caniff.
And so seconded?
Councillor Sakachi, go ahead.
I just wanted to pull it to vote on it separately. I could go on about this again, but I know when you're losing a fight, and I know this fight's been lost, so I'm just going to continue to oppose it, but just wanted to pull it for that reason. Thanks.
Councillor Juvenville.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. I have a question, and I'm wondering if I can just get some information. It's not specifically on this motion right now, but there is a lot of concern from the rural areas that because we've decreased, or it appears, the optics are that we've decreased councillors specifically in the rural areas, but I think what is being lost in translation is that Chatham proper itself has grown, and the 6 councillors in Chatham proper are now going to be responsible for more constituents, more so in North Kent, which used to be in North Kent and South Kent. So those boundaries have expanded with Chatham proper. So the councillors in Chatham proper are going to be having more constituents, and then that will demonstrate that the councillors in the rural areas will have less, specifically in the 2 wards that there's only going to be 1 councillor. So I guess what I'm wondering, if there's any way, and I'm thinking perhaps Judy or Sabine and Olivia could maybe put their fingers on it very quickly. I just want to be able to tell the people who have the concerns how many population, I don't think they did it by electors, I think it was just population. For example, how many people from North Kent are now in Chatham proper? And how many people from South Kent are now in, I forget what those 2 wards are. But basically, how many people have been absorbed into the Chatham wards is what I'm looking to see if that number could be found at any time. I mean, not necessarily tonight, but maybe very soon. That's all I'm looking for.
Yeah, to you, Your Worship, I think We can answer that. I don't think we can answer it tonight. I think the other thing, quite frankly, we've been thinking about is the impact once this bylaw passes. If it passes, the impact it will have on other things. Maybe not as significant as your question, but for instance, we have a ward boundary funding, what that would look like going forward. So there's a couple things that we'd have to look at. And so I think on Judy's behalf, the clerk's not here, but I think we can undertake to provide a report to address that, as well as maybe some of the other issues that, like I said, I don't think they're significant, but they're changes that will impact us going forward, and we should have the opportunity to be transparent about that.
Okay, thank you. That was all I wanted to ask.
Seeing no other questions, we'll put it to vote.
Councillor Finn? Oh, sorry. Motion carries 11-4. The next item is 18C, 2024 Information and Privacy Commissioner Statistical Report.
Councillor Harrigan.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. Recognizing that this report was just for information, I just wanted to draw attention to the significant increase of requests that we've had over the last few years and how that's really grown, particularly since 2015 and 2016. So through you, I had sent this question in advance. Are you able, or staff able to comment on whether or not this number of requests includes already existing public information, or if that would kind of increase the number, or if that's captured in there? And then also maybe comment on, again, just the types of requests that we're getting, and if there is any sort of relation to larger conversations that are happening at council, et cetera.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. So just to kind of touch on the first part, so the increase in requests is something that's generally being seen across the province. We did seek feedback from the City of London as well as the City of Sarnia, just kind of neighboring larger municipalities, just because at this time, prior to the IPC's submission deadline, larger statistics aren't available until everyone's submitted. But the City of London and the City of Sarnia also report similar increases, kind of matching our increases to an extent. We're well below the number of requests that the City of London gets, but the City of Sarnia seems to follow us. Whatever we had one year, they seem to have the year after type of situation. The types of requests that we are seeing do tend to vary at all different times, but generally since my time here, we see things of a common nature such as building drawings and plans, Ontario Works files, bylaw enforcement, animal control, property standards, those types of things coming through quite frequently. And then, of course, kind of hot topics that council is discussing, large projects, those tend to be things of interest as well. And then just lastly, on the public information piece of it, if we become aware prior to the submission of the request or working with the requester that there is information that they're seeking that is already public, we do direct them through other avenues other than the FOI process, because the FOI process is intended for items that either aren't available or aren't routinely available. If we become aware during the process that the request involves some portion of records that are already publicly available or were publicly available, we don't charge additional fees for that portion of the request.
Great, thank you. Appreciate the information.
Thank you. The next item.
Next item is 18D, motion by Councillor Bondy regarding the Municipality Accountability Act 2024.
Councillor Bondy.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. I'll read it. It's pretty short. In response to Honorable Paul Calander's legislation tabled in December 2024, Municipal Accountability Act 2024, that Chatham-Kent Council send a letter to Minister Calandra and Premier Doug Ford and the provincial government opposing any legislation that would allow for the removal of a duly elected municipal official and the disqualification of members of municipal councils and certain local boards for a period of 4 years. Council is in support of the democratic process and recognizes that only the voting public has the ability to remove a sitting elected government official. Council recognizes that elections alone determine who sits on any municipal council, and that practice cannot be undone by unelected bureaucrats and integrity commissioners.
Can I get a seconder for that? Councillor Juneville, back to you, Councillor Bondi.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. I'll just respond to the critique page, which I'm not a real big fan of these. These are kind of new. I find they're not terribly objective. When you read it, you can see kind of where administration would like this thing to go. But anyway, that's another point. Council did vote in favor of 2 resolutions that are on the critique page. And what I would like to point out is that on the second resolution, that, of course, for people that aren't reading it, these resolutions are asking council if they endorse integrity commissioners having further training, adjusting their policies and practices, and they passed. Now, the second resolution was broken into several pieces, and one of the second piece of this second resolution was endorsing the ability of integrity commissioners to go to a court and have a council removed. Now, that also passed, but that council vote here was 9 in favor, 8 against, so it was razor thin. Now, and it did pass, but what passed was the ability of the integrity commissioner to go to a court. The provincial legislation doesn't ask for a court. It just asks for, and again, in my motion, which was pointed out, I said unelected officials and integrity commissioners. Now, in fairness, there would also have to be a unanimous council vote to remove somebody. And so they are elected. So that my motion was a little misleading, and I apologize for that. But what the province wants to do is not go to a court. We're not a court. The province is not a court. Integrity commissioners are not courts. So that waters down the threshold of removing somebody. So I believe that if somebody acts terribly, and there's been some examples of that, of course, we've seen, everybody's got YouTube, then there is a mechanism to sanction a councillor. They take away their pay for 3 months. And I think council could probably have that person not enter the council chambers, which has also been done in different municipalities, and to participate via Zoom or not, I guess, on that councillor's decision. What I don't like about what the province wants to do is that it would give the ability for a councillor to be removed, a democratically elected councillor. Now, the firewall as well, it's very unlikely that they would get unanimous council approval unless the act was just so egregious. Now, yeah, probably here, because we've got an awful lot of councillors, a little bit less next term, but if you went to a smaller community, you could have tens of thousands of people that vote for somebody, and effectively, a dozen people could get rid of that person for what may not be a very offensive act. Like, that's very subjective, Facebook posts, etc. We've seen things go to the integrity commissioner that I think are not worthy of that kind of scrutiny. But when it happens, if an unpopular councillor is unpopular, I just don't think that 12 people should be able to unseat somebody. Like, there's a good way to fire us. It's not vote for us the next time around. And you're not stuck with us for 20 years. It's a 4-year term. And the offense probably isn't in the first week of that term. So it's a pretty simple ask. What I'm asking is that we as a council send a message to the province that we do not agree that elected officials should be disqualified and removed from office without the process of the ballot box. And that's, it's pretty simple, so that's that. Thanks.
Councillor Jubenville, followed by Councillor Crew.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. I'll obviously support this as well. Basically, I'll echo what Councillor Bondi said. My concern would be in a smaller council, a lot of municipal councils, you might see 6 people. So it's very easy to have a mentality to turn against one of their colleagues in a smaller council. And again, I think if someone does something egregious, if they've committed a criminal offense, been charged with it, yes, absolutely, they'd probably end up being incarcerated anyway, but even if they didn't, sure, they don't belong on a council, but to me, that would have to be something very egregious that they would have to commit. I don't think it should be left up to a council or an unelected integrity commissioner to make that decision. I think it should be the electorate who decides who they vote in and who they remove, and nobody else. So I will support this. I'm not sure if this bill would still be in effect because obviously of the provincial election, but I still think it's a good idea to send this just to be proactive in case it becomes alive again. So I think we should still send it. Thank you.
Councillor Crew, followed by Councillor Harrigan.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. Just briefly, I am not going to support this. I think that holding councillors accountable for, I'm not going to judge on the acts, but whatever is outlined, but we do have our own code of conduct, and that's what our integrity commissioner bases her decisions on when there's a complaint, whether they're frivolous or not. But I think that we do have our own democratic process. Each one of us are sitting here elected to make decisions on behalf of our community. If we go to the province or ask for an election on each and every item, because I think for not doing our job, because we're put here to make decisions and to democratically vote on items. I'm not going to support this. I think that we have to have a process to hold us accountable, and I'm just not going to support it. I could keep going on, but that's all I have to say about that for today.
Councillor Harrigan, followed by Councillor B. McGregor.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. I do have some technical questions building on Councillor Jubenville's comments there at the end of her statements that through you I'd like to ask to Dave Taylor, if that's all right. So the first question is about the first kind of couple of clauses in this motion. Can you please, Dave, kind of give us an update about where the December 2024 Municipal Accountability Act stands, as well as the current minister, if there is currently a minister that's standing?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor, for the question. It's Dave Taylor, Director of Legal Services. So yes, because the provincial government did end up calling an election, the result of that is that any pieces of legislation that had not already worked their way through in order to get passed, then just essentially die on the floor. Now, of course, we now know the results of the election and whether or not the new provincial government will choose to pass some other piece of legislation similar to this. We don't know that, but that's a possibility because they did obviously win the election. And then similar, there will be appointments for ministry positions that I'm sure we'll hear about very soon.
Perfect. So I also don't intend on supporting this again, more for some technicalities here, but there is really no legislation today called the Municipal Accountability Act of 2024 to respond to as a council.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you for that. I actually had sent in the question to ask if this was something that would require 2/3 motion, because while there's different legislation, the principle of what was passed in 2023 was of a council that supported the concept specifically of members being removed under process, not being able to sit in under elections or under the term, like they would be removed from that term in a subsequent term. So in my opinion, this motion goes against that. I was told by staff that because it's referencing different acts, we don't have to do it over 2/3, and that's fine. But I just also wanted to draw attention to the last clause in this notice of motion and the importance of making sure that the motions that we have and whether or not we're going to support them, that our intention matches what's on paper. Because on paper here, it says council recognizes that elections alone determine who sits on any municipal council, and that practice cannot be undone by unelected bureaucrats or integrity commissioners. What if there is a council member who does some sort of major infraction and finds themselves in prison? And what if that infraction is something as dangerous as an assault against another council member or member of staff in the municipality? Then I think we may go through or have provincially legislated processes that would allow us to exit that council member because perhaps they're sitting in jail. And while I know that that is an extreme, the way that this motion is worded doesn't account for those extremes. It just simply says elections alone determine who sits on any municipal council. And so I can't support this because I think that that's dangerous. I also do really support the work that AMO does and the policy development that takes place at the provincial level, and think that if us as a council are going to respond to provincial policies or provincial legislation that's written, let's let that be researched, written, proposed, and then we can respond to whatever we have in front of us, rather than making kind of blanket statements that I think kind of drum up negativity and debate on social media and other things that don't need to be there. So that's why I'm not supporting this motion, and hope that as a council, we continue to support the work that AMO has been doing around ensuring that we have safe spaces for elected officials to operate.
Councillor B. McGregor, followed by Councillor McGrail.
Thank you, and appreciate Councillor Harrigan's comments about particularly the last clause in this motion. And I think for some context, it's important to note that right now the only way you can be removed from council is if you spend too much money in your campaign. So in 2018, Toronto Municipal Councillor spent too much money on their celebration party, immediately lost her seat on council. So there are consequences to some of that activity, but they're only to financial malfeasance, so to speak. A lot of the advocacy for this type of legislation came from a case in Ottawa where some very brave women came forward about some horrendous behavior by a council member. And it was actually called by the Integrity Commissioner that he was continually exploiting the power dynamic of the employer-employee relationship and committed incomprehensible incidents of harassment. And that individual was not able to be removed from council. Those people who were employed had to continue to work at their jobs knowing that that person was still sitting in a council chair. So I think it's important to note that these rules and these changes come about, unfortunately, because there's been really terrible behavior, and there is no mechanism to protect people from that type of behavior. So I hope that legislation like this gets retabled. I thank the people that came forward and have been advocating for this for a long time. And I think that employees, that elected officials, everyone deserves a safe workplace. And that's what this is about. We're accountable to each other, and ultimately we're accountable for our behavior. This is a process that, even as written in this legislation, is a huge bar to meet in order for someone to be dismissed. And there needs to be a mechanism for that accountability. So I won't support this motion, and I certainly hope that all the bipartisan efforts that have gone into getting legislation like this tabled continue from the province, and that we see something come forward soon.
Councillor McGrail.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Kenneth. This might be a Dave question again. I just want to touch a little bit on the Integrity Commissioner. How does one become an Integrity Commissioner? How do they rule? Is there an act that they have to rule by? Because they just can't come and make up decisions, right? There is definitely an act that they have to rule under, I'm going to say.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Councillor, for the question. So the Integrity Commissioner is appointed by Council here, and Council has a code of conduct. And for many of the investigations that the Integrity Commissioners are going to do, there's actually a process in that code of conduct. But then you're correct as well that there's components under the Municipal Act that also deal with Integrity Commissioners. There's a couple of other pieces of legislation that also can get referenced in terms of the way in which they do their inquiries for some process that may not be covered otherwise in the code of conduct.
Great. I'm just trying to establish the credibility of an integrity commissioner, and that, you know, this is a person that takes their job seriously and rules accordingly within the guidelines of the acts.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, certainly, and you'll see in decisions that the Integrity Commissioner renders, they will if they actually go forward with a formal investigation, they'll write a report in which they've actually articulated how they've reached all of the decisions based on the evidence they saw on applications to the law, to the code, and also to any previous cases often.
Perfect. And one other thing I want to point out is that council does not suggest a penalty. It's the integrity commissioner that does, and council then approves it.
So thank you, Mr. Chair, there is a bit of a caveat there. Often the integrity commissioner may recommend a penalty. They've already gone through that, but ultimately it is council that makes the decision about whether to impose that penalty or some different penalty if there's been a code violation that has been found.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, seeing no other questions, I'll go to Councillor Juvenville, then final comments, Councillor Bondi.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to tag on to, again, if changing or adding a friendly amendment, if a counselor was found to be if he was charged and convicted of a crime, he or she, then would that change the decision of some of the people that are going to vote against this? If that would make a difference, I don't know. But again, another colleague mentioned that there was some egregious offenses being committed on another council in Ontario, and if he indeed was doing it, it's terrible, but if there was no criminal harassment or sexual harassment charges, I don't know. I don't understand. If there was something happening, why was this counselor not charged of something? So I still think unless someone commits a criminal offense, that they should not be removed. I think we should let the people that elected that counselor, we should let them remove them. So I'm going to support this.
Councillor Bondi, final words.
Sure, thank you, Mayor Caniff. Yeah, this job that we have as counselors, it's unique in that we are hired by the public. What this potentially, and I understand that, you know, this is dead because of the election, but I'm assuming it may come back. So that's why I want to go forward with this. But back to my point is we're hired by the public, but yet we'd be fired by people that probably didn't vote for us at all. So it's a kind of a unique job in that way. So I just wanted to highlight that. And two other quick points. So what happened in Ottawa, I didn't know about it, and it sounds like a terrible thing. But there's like 244 municipalities in Ontario, so there's thousands and thousands of councillors over the course of many, many years. So yeah, some bad thing's gonna happen. Like, you know, I don't agree that we should make this, you know, government overreach law because of one terrible incident in Ottawa. It sounds like it's an incredibly isolated thing that happened, and you know, I don't know any of the details about it, but statistically, it's very, very uncommon. And just one other quick point, I think it was Councillor Crew had made a motion some years ago about this, about having a councillor removed, and our old integrity commissioner, Mary Ellen Bench, was standing right there, and she said, no, that's way too far. That's going way, and some of us will remember that. So, do you remember that? No, I'm sure you can't remember it. Yeah, okay, I'll leave that there. But the integrity commissioner, like our previous one, when it was suggested to her, she was absolutely opposed to it. It went too far. That was government overreach, and she didn't even want to discuss it. So I do see that our new integrity commissioner is coming along here sometime in April, so she may have an opinion on this. And I'm quite surprised somebody didn't try and defer this. That was my prediction, but unfortunately that didn't come true. So I hope you support the motion. Thank you very much.
With that, we'll put it to vote.
Motion fails 4-12.
We'll go to notice of motion. We'll start with Councillor Bondi and then over to Councillor Scotchy.
I'm back again. That was quick. Thank you, Mayor Caniff. I, Councillor Bondi, move the following motion to be debated and voted upon at the next council meeting. Whereas, as members of the public have consistently pointed out, the renovation estimates used for the Civic Centre was almost twice that of the Sears building on a per square footage basis. Whereas, the renovation estimates were provided by two different sources, the Civic Centre by a local architectural firm and the Sears building by another firm. Whereas, a detailed breakdown in cost was provided by the architectural firm for the Civic Centre, but there was no such breakdown in cost for the Sears building. Whereas Council has authorized millions of dollars in expenditures to further explore this project based on these estimates. Therefore, be it resolved that at the upcoming April 7th, 2025 Council meeting, administration shall provide a detailed explanation and a side-by-side comparison as to why the hub renovation estimate was priced out at $444 per square foot, $53 million total for the 119,000 and change square footage, and the Civic Centre priced at $850 a square foot, $37 million for a total of 43,000 square feet. Yeah, that's everything. Thank you.
Councillor Scotchy.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. I, Councillor Anthony Sikachi, here provide notice that I'll be bringing the following motion for voting discussion on the April 7th meeting of Council. Whereas the community of Blenheim is served by Integris power lines, with the power to the community being supplied by Hydro One Network, and whereas Blenheim has experienced a significant decrease in power reliability and outages being more frequent and longer in duration, and whereas these outages have been driven by numerous factors and compounded by Hydro One eliminating Blenheim's second power supply, and whereas these frequent disruptions have become a pressing concern for many residents, especially lately as they have become more frequent in length and duration, and whereas Blenheim is a growing community and reliable supply is integral for the current and future residential, commercial, industrial customers, be it resolved that the Mayor and Council request that the municipality staff and the Mayor's office liaison with Integris and Hydro One to compile information report on reoccurring power supply interruptions in Blenheim and the plan to reestablish Blenheim's second supply with the aim of Hydro One and Integris presenting it at a future council meeting.
Over to closed session reports. Councillor Hall and Councillor Doyle, can I get you to second that?
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. Closed session report for Monday, March 3rd, 2025. Council directed administration on proposed disposition of land regarding offer to purchase property identification number 005311513 Marici Way, Community of Chatham, Section 239 2C of the Municipal Act, and I so move.
I still second.
Any questions? Seeing none, put it to vote.
Motion carries 16-0.
Non-agenda business. Councillor Crew, Councillor Harrigan, Councillor.
I have, thank you, Mayor Caniff. I have two. I'm going to read the first one. Today, the Community Safety and Wellbeing Committee met to discuss the complexities behind the existence of the homeless encampments through the presentation of real case scenarios that happen in Chatham-Kent. The purpose of this meeting was to outline why mental health, homelessness, and addictions should be top priority for the 2025 Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan. To engage the community in the development of the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan, a public survey has been created to measure the community's beliefs about which elements of safety and well-being are the most important. The survey is available to all CK residents on Let's Talk Chatham-Kent. They can find it there. So please go and have your feelings known about what you'd like to see for our next Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan. And right now there's 55 completed surveys, but we'd like to see that up over a few hundred because community safety and well-being is a priority of Chatham-Kent, and this is our plan for our community for the next year. So next I have, I want to say on the weekend, on Saturday night, Mayor Caniff, Councillor Brock McGregor, and myself attended the Chatham-Kent Black Excellence Awards. And I want to say congratulations to all of the winners of those awards. I want to give I'm not going to list them all because I will miss one. There was a lot. But I do want to mention the Trailblazer Award that was acknowledged the life of Olive Olby. She was very excited to receive the award, very surprised. In her 98 years, she said that she's seen a lot, and we really surprised her. So I want to congratulate Olive on her Trailblazer Award and all of the recipients, and to the organizers of that event. It was really well done. Thank you.
Councillor Harrigan, followed by Councillor B. McGregor.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. Through the mayor, I just have some questions to staff about some activity that residents have noticed in front of the Queen Street buildings that are currently blocked off. So wondering if staff can comment about those changes and what we can expect going forward.
Thank you, Your Worship. Bruce McAllister, General Manager of Development Services. So, yes, certainly, given that the current demolition is being paused to allow the insurers of 45 and Queen Street to make a determination on next steps regarding the remaining buildings, it's been determined that the concrete barriers in front of 47 and 49 Queen Street could be removed by the contractor temporarily. Once the demolition was paused last year, the steel fencing that was connected to the barriers was moved away from those barriers and moved closer to the buildings to allow pedestrian safe passage on the municipal sidewalk in front of the buildings. A security fence will remain around the entire property to prohibit entry into the site until all work is completed. And once demolition work is set to resume, it will then be determined if the barriers or other safety measures are once again warranted to complete the demolition. You know, as we previously communicated, the municipality has been in active communication with the owner's insurer to confirm a plan to see 45 and 55 Queen Street remedied as soon as possible so that demolition work can once again proceed. The municipality certainly recognizes the current unsightly nature of the site and has stressed the importance of the project moving quickly in its communications with the property ownership and the insurance providers. Thanks.
Thank you.
Councillor B. McGregor.
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. I reminded everyone last week that it was the start of Workforce Week in Chatham-Kent, and there's so much going on, it lasts longer than a week. So a reminder that on Wednesday is the job fair at the Bradley Center, and just wanted to thank all the employers, community groups that will be there, and recognize our CK Jobs team here at the Municipality of Chatham-Kent for all the work that they put into a really successful week and a really important event on Wednesday that if you're looking for a job or some information on careers in Chatham-Kent, that's a great place to be.
Just to add that as well, there's going to be, that event's going to be 80 employers from around Chatham-Kent are going to be there. And the great thing of last year, there was a ton of people turning out, but there's a number of people from outside of Chatham-Kent. That's the key piece. If it was just people coming from Chatham-Kent, all it does is change the workforce around. They had people coming from out west seeking jobs here in Chatham-Kent. So it's a very important thing that with 80 employers all looking for workers. So with that, we'll move into first and second reading. Councillor Allen and Councillor McGrail. Can I get you to move the first and second, please?
Happy to move it.
Seconded.
Anyone opposed? Motion carried. Third and final reading. Councillor C. McGregor and Councillor Crew.
Happy to move.
Seconded.
Anyone opposed? Motion carried. The resolution of council. Councillor Hall and Councillor McDonald, can I get you to wrap it up for us?
Thank you, Mayor Caniff. I move that Chatham-Kent Council adjourn to its next meeting to be held on Monday, March 17th, 2025, and that Chatham-Kent Council authorize itself to meet in closed session on that day to discuss any matters permitted by the Municipal Act.
And seconded.
Anyone opposed to wrapping it up at 8:41? Going once, going twice? It's wrapped up. Thank you, everybody.